Today on Ham Radio Q&A, a recorded presentation on using hotspots to get onto the digital voice modes, so please keep watching for more. Hi, I'm Michael, KD9IBT, your host for Ham Radio Q&A. I'm on a mission to inspire and educate the amateur radio community, so if this is your first time watching, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Well, recently I attended the 21st Annual Wisconsin Aries Races Conference. Now, this annual conference is for emergency communicators interested in furthering their skills and networking with other like-minded people. This event's pretty well attended, pulling in over 100 amateur radio operators from around the state. I think the strong attendance along with the caliber of its presenters really makes for the must-go-to event and for anyone interested in emergency communications. Plus, this event always has the best door prizes, and I got this really fancy coffee mug, perfect size for drinking bourbon out of. I recorded a couple of the breakout sessions, and in this video I have a presentation titled Hotspot Types: How to Get on the Digital Voice Modes. This is by John Hamilton KD9IBT. Thank you, John, for taking the time to prepare this presentation for the conference. I'm not going to really talk anymore, so instead I'm just going to turn it over to him.
So my name is John Hamilton KD9IBT. I'm out of the Lakeshore Amateur Radio Service Club in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. And I was asked by Kathy to give a presentation on hotspots. Now, with only 10 minutes, it's going to make it a little bit difficult to cover everything that's necessary to set up a hotspot. However, my very first part of my presentation is going to cover the most important and usually the most difficult part, which is getting connected to the internet. Just briefly, if you're not familiar with the hotspots at all, you realize that there's two parts to it. You're going to have the radio modem board. That's going to be the radio part. It's going to be what allows us to connect and communicate with the radio. It also is responsible for setting up the ones and zeros of converting things into a digital mode. Then you have the computer board, and this is one example of a computer board. This is, I think, a Pi 3. You can use Pi 0s, you can use Pi 4s, and then there's actually some other types of computer boards that you can do. That handles processing the signals, processing power, and then also connecting to the internet. With the hotspot setup, like I said, several different steps that are involved. That outlines the steps there. The initial step is usually the most difficult step. When we first power on the hotspot, what we want to do is wait, especially if it's the first time we've powered on, or if we're in a new location that we've never connected to the internet at that particular location. Turn on the hotspot, go get a cup of coffee. Take a break, just let it power on. What the hotspot does initially is it looks for known networks. If there are no known networks, say that a few times, right? No known networks, it goes into what's known as the auto AP mode. The auto AP mode is a means for setting up that network. Once you've let it sit there for about 2 minutes, you're going to open up your computer browser, and then you're going to click on the tab in order to get to, let me see here, I can show you right on the screen. Down here in the corner on my computer, I've got this little Wi-Fi signal. You're not seeing that. Well, we'll skip that. We'll just keep going. Sorry about that. I thought you would be able to see that. The Wi-Fi signal that's in your toolbar, you're going to click on that, and in that list of Wi-Fi networks, you should see Pi-Star Setup. You're going to connect to Pi-Star Setup. Your computer may have a little bit of a fit because it's going to say, hey, there's no internet connection. And of course, we know the computers love to be connected to the internet. But the first thing we need to do is connect directly to the Pi-Star. And we do this by selecting that Pi-Star Setup. You'll be presented with a password box and a Raspberry, which is the default password for the Pi-Star-based hotspots. And then you're going to open up a browser window and go to one of those links that I've got there, whether it be the Pi-Star, the Pi-Star.local, or if you're using a mobile device, you've got it on your phone, enter the actual IP address. Once you do that, it's going to bring up the dashboard window. And this is going to be what allows you to set that Wi-Fi configuration. And like I have over here in red, one of the things that's kind of important is you set this up at your home, you do it the first time, and then you decide you're going to Aunt Edna's for Thanksgiving dinner and you want to take along your radio and your hotspot. You'll have to do it again in Aunt Edna's house because the Pi Star won't know what her Wi-Fi network is. So it's a good idea to kind of refresh your memory from time to time on how to do this, because this is what you have to do anywhere you go with a new network. So a couple of screens that you'll see initially are going to be the setup and configuration. If it's the very first time that you're setting up the hotspot, you're going to see that no mode defined. That's fine, you just kind of click on through that. And then you're going to have to, again, do a username and password. And the username is Pi Star, the password is Raspberry. Once you come up onto the dashboard screen, which this will be the first screen, the header of the first screen that you see, you're going to click on Configuration. Once you click on Configuration, you're going to scroll down to the very bottom of that screen to where you see the wireless configuration. Now there's two things that you can select there. You can select either Add Network and manually enter the information, or you can select Scan for networks. Once you select Scan, the Pi Star needs to sit there and think for about 10 seconds. Doesn't look like it's doing anything, but eventually it pulls up a list of available networks. If your network is in that list, go ahead and click on it. And it will fill in the information. In fact, you can see here, this is what the Scan network produces at the bottom. I took this screenshot when I was in my own house, so that's why Hamilton's at the top of the list. Once I select that, I'm going to enter the password. And you can see at the top of the screen there, I've got the Hamilton network. Underneath is where I enter my password for that Wi-Fi network. The second one that you'll see, and you can set up multiple different networks. So you can save your Aunt Edna's house Wi-Fi. Next time you go back there, it'll see that known Wi-Fi and it'll connect automatically. There is a way to set it up through your iPhone. That's why you see John's iPhone on there, because if I'm out and about, I can have it route through my iPhone for internet access. The next thing, now I know I said that that was the hardest part of all of this, and it really is. That's the part that seems to trip people up. And one of the reasons is that you have to be patient. You have to be incredibly patient when you're doing this, because it is a small microprocessor computer. It doesn't probably work quite as fast as your home PC. So when you do this, click on it, wait for it to start up, wait that 2 to 3 minutes for it to go into the auto AP mode, then take the next step. And so if you start clicking too many times or too fast, that's when you're going to have to go back and start all over again, and you might as well go get one more cup of coffee. So under the basic configuration, a lot of this stuff in the next few slides are actually pretty easy, pretty self-explanatory. You'll see that you have to select the controller software. It really comes down to whether you're going to use a D-Star setup or whether you're going to use any of the other modes. The MMDB host is the one that you're going to use for the YSF, the DMR, the P25, the next end. And then in most cases, you're going to select the simplex mode. There are some hotspots that are out there on the market that are actually dual channel. You'll notice right away because they've got 2 antennas on them. If that's the case, you'll just go ahead and select that duplex repeater mode. Now, here's the other part that always gets people. They go to the next section because they're excited about putting in their call sign and their location and all that other good stuff, and they forget to hit apply changes. So tell yourself right now, when I complete a section, hit apply changes. The Pi Star is going to look like it does nothing for a few moments, then it's going to shut down, and then it's going to come back on, and it will come back on right where you left off, and then you can go to the next section. If you fill out all the sections and only hit apply at the bottom section, the only thing that's going to save is the bottom section. A couple of things, and I kind of prepared this for like a half-hour presentation, so we're going to go real quickly through some of the screens. But one of the things to look at when you look at these different screens, you can see over there on the far side of the screen, I put the little note that says if you hover your mouse over any of those entries, So hover it over DMR, hover it over YSF to DMR. It tells you what that particular entry is about. It gives you some instructions. So if you see something, you don't know exactly what it is, hover your mouse there, it gives you those instructions. Now, one of the things that is recommended when you first set up your hotspot, choose one mode. There's all kinds of modes we can select, that whole list all the way down the side of the screen there. But select one mode. So if you are familiar with DMR, go ahead and select DMR. If you're familiar with the Fusion type or based digital mode, select Fusion, the YSF. If you select 3 different modes all at once, you're going to be kind of inundated with lots of different choices. Not all the choices necessarily work together. So we set up DMR initially. After we select DMR, what this is going to do is it's going to open an additional screen that allows us to enter DMR specific information. But before that, we got to enter this general information. And this is the part everybody's always excited about. I get to put in the name of my hotspot. Now up here on the desk, I've got 3 different hotspots. The one on the far corner of the desk, I call Zoom JPH. Those are my initials. The one in the middle, no, I'm sorry, I take that back. The one on the far end is Zoom 2. The one in the middle is Zoom JPH. And then the one on the end I call Zoom iOS, because it's my iOS board that I use. Doing that host name, that's what you're doing. You're giving a specific name to your hotspot. If you only have the one hotspot, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. But when you have multiple hotspots, or if you're getting together with your buddies down at the coffee shop, your radio's not going to necessarily know which one is which, or the computer's not going to know which one is which because of all the similar names. So a unique name is and can be a good thing for you. Next, you're going to enter your call sign, obviously, and then the DMR ID. John talked about that briefly. I've got the link at the end of the slides here that shows how you get to that. But in order to do DMR, you have to have that specific ID that you register for. It doesn't cost anything, just takes a couple of minutes and you get that ID number. You'll put in the radio frequency that you want to use for that particular Zoom spot. All of my Zoom spots vary by 1 megahertz. If you have 2 Zoom spots and you put them both on the same frequency, but one's DMR and one's YSF, you're going to have all kinds of trouble, so don't do that. Vary your hotspots if you have more than one. You're going to put in the rest of the information there, the lat, long, town, QTH, grid square. Your URL there is a way for, on the dashboard, which we'll get to in a moment, somebody can click on your call sign and it takes them right to your QRZ page by default. You can put any website in there you want, but most people do their QRZ page. The radio and modem type, you can see there's a long list of choices. If you buy a Zoom spot from HRO, which is, I think, for most people, one of the most common and easiest ways to buy one, you're going to select the Zoom spot Raspberry Pi hat. But you'll be able to gather that information from whichever manufacturer you get it from. A couple of the other things there, you can set up an APR host, multiple choices. There's a rotating host is where the signal rotates depending on which APRS host is working at that time or refreshes soonest. So that's usually the best one. Your time zone, and then of course your language. That's what that screen looks like. That's where you're entering all that information. And you can see it follows right down through there. So a couple of slides back, we talked about the different configurations that we can set up, whether it be DMR, YSF. This is an example. If you selected YSF, the screen that would come up. You'll see that there's a drop-down list there. I've got it set on America Link at the time. Right now, this is one of the more popular System Fusion rooms that's out there. Basically, all you're doing is you're putting a startup room. So you start up the Zoom spot, you turn on the radio, that's the room that it's going to go to first. If you don't want that in there, you select, you don't select anything, but it's a nice convenient thing. The uppercase host file is specific to the FT70DR, which is the radio I have on the far end down there. It just fixes a little configuration in the way that the Pi-Star talks to the radio so that you get your call signs on there. And then the last one, the WiresX pass-through. I actually just figured this out not too long ago. If I am using my hotspot to go from YSF to DMR, I can actually give commands to the System Fusion Radio to change my DMR room. Now, if you're at all familiar with this, or you've messed around with hotspots before, it used to be that you actually had to go back into the dashboard and change your DMR room on the computer. A lot of people didn't like that, so they figured out a way to make it possible to actually change rooms while you're on the radio rather than the hotspot. DMR configuration is actually very similar. You can see there that there's a drop-down list where you choose the master. You can set up a hotspot security if you want, not necessary. The ESS ID, that's that ID number that you have to register for in order to work on DMR. Most often the next three, the color code, the embedded, and then the dump data, the default settings are fine. Again, another look, if I have YSF to DMR set up, I'm going to get where I set up both configurations. Just gives you an idea of what some of those screens look like. You can see down there in the YSF configuration on the bottom, it's a little different than the YSF configuration we saw a couple of slides ago because it adds in the DMR information. So now I have my DMR ID there. It tells the radio when I go into a DMR mode how to do that. Cross modes, that's where we, of course, enter the different cross modes that are possible. I'll be honest, I've done the YSF to DMR, and then Chris, who's given the DMR lecture, he actually loaned me his Hytera radio, which is strictly a DMR radio. I've used that to actually go DMR to YSF, so it is possible to go both directions. And that's a little bit of what John was talking about in his lecture, that you can have a radio that does a specific mode, but because of these cross modes, you're able to open up a whole other mode that you didn't have before. The NextN and P25, I honestly don't have any experience on any of those. As John mentioned, it's one of those things that not a lot of people are using it necessarily in the amateur world quite yet, at least not in the circles I'm hanging in. Again, this is a reiteration of what John talked about with the Wisconsin link. The idea that he set this up so that no matter what mode you're using, no matter what kind of radio you're using, you can gain access to this talk group or this room, depending on what system you're using, and access that. And I can, on my DMR radio, talk to Ken on his System Fusion radio, and other people that are in that room are going to hear those conversations regardless of what type of device that they're using. I noticed a few people taking pictures, so I'll wait. And I think Kathy is going to have this on the website eventually. Mine's going to be a lot easier, but yeah, so it will be out there eventually. So eventually it'll be good to go through and read all the information. Firewall configurations, default settings are usually the best. I've never really even messed with this. The only reason I put it on there is because it is one of the screens, and it's nice to know that a little bit about what it's there for. Like I said, default settings are usually the best settings. This is what the dashboard looks like. This is the screen that a lot of people use when they're actually using the radio. Now, depending on the Zoom spot that you have, you may have a screen on the Zoom spot that will bring up call signs. Depending on how it's configured, it may even bring up additional information. Like on the Zoom spot I have in the middle with the larger screen, it actually is programmed so that it shows a flag of the country of that call sign. So a little bit, kind of fun information. But if you don't have that, but you still want to know who that call sign is, and you're sitting at your computer, you bring up the dashboard's going to give you all that information. And you can see I whited it out, but underneath here is a list of all the call signs that have been talking. And so the top call sign is the most recent. That's where if you click on that call sign, it takes you to their QRZ page, or whatever web page they program. So it gives you a little bit more information about the people that you're talking to, if that is helpful for you. If you are fine just knowing their call sign while you talk with them, then you don't necessarily have to sit at the computer and watch all of this as it goes along. Up at the top there where it says dashboard, admin, and configuration, the next screen over, which is the admin screen, is very similar to the dashboard. It just provides a little bit of additional information. There's some other characteristics on the hotspot. For example, it shows you what the temperature is up there in the green. Not a lot on here that I use on a regular basis, but it does provide a little bit of additional information. So the radio configuration. Now I've got 3 radios up here. 2 of them are Yaesu radios. I pictured the FT70 because that's my radio. The FT2DR is actually Ken's radio that I borrowed here. But regardless of what kind of radio you have, a couple of things that have to happen on your radio. First off, you got to tune to the frequency that you set your hotspot at. Seems silly, but and something that really shouldn't be said. But I've picked up a radio and gone, man, why can't I get connected to my Zoom slot? Oh, it's not on the right frequency. The next thing is you got to double check and make sure you're in simplex. That's my second most common mistake when I'm trying to set up a radio. Because a lot of times by default, you go and you program in the frequency and it automatically puts in the repeater offset. You got to take out the repeater offset, you got to take it out of that repeater mode, because otherwise, it has to be in simplex. It's not going to connect otherwise. Need to make sure it's connected into a digital. As we know with the Yaesu radios that they are both FM analog and digital, so you got to make sure that it's in the digital narrow mode. After that, you use the appropriate radio software or radio buttons to connect to that network, to connect to YSF, to connect to DMR. That's a little bit more radio specific. In most cases, the first thing I do is I actually hit the push to talk button, because that tells the radio to talk to the Zoom spot. And the Zoom spot and the radio are now talking to one another. And then I go ahead and I with the Yaesu radios, you usually just follow the configuration or the steps necessary to connect to wires X. Even though you're not necessarily connecting directly to wires X, it's still that same button push sequence. A couple other things that always come up about digital transmissions, and I think it's worth saying because I've certainly been hurt by this. You always want to wait a couple of seconds after you hit push to talk before you start talking, because you got to wait for that whole digital system to catch up with you. And you want to make sure that you're not chopping off the beginning of your transmission. And then you always want to allow for a short pause between transmissions. So if I say KD9AQN, this is KD9IBT, and he jumps in right away with his call sign, the thing that happens is not so much that it interferes with us, but anybody else listening that goes, I don't want to listen to John anymore. They got to be able to enter the code to get out of that talk group or out of that room. And as long as there's a transmission going on, you can't enter those codes. So putting that little pause in there helps with the other people that are on that talk group or room so that they can get out of there. Because again, they might not want to listen to me for much longer. Some of the references, of course, Pi-Star has their own website, the Pi-Star UK. The best one that I found though, and the way that I found this is when I bought my first Zoom spot, the KE0FHS, Amateur Radio Notes. It's a guy by the name of Toshin, and he lives in Colorado. And his website was the reference for the Zoom spots on the HRO website when they first came out with the Zoom spots. I have yet to find a better reference. AmateurRadioNotes.com. I've emailed the guy several times. He's awesome. Super nice guy. Look at his website. He's got tons of digital networking and digital voice stuff. Some of the Pi-Star based hotspots, like I said, most of them are Pi-Star based. And then you've got the Shark RF OpenSpot. That's actually proprietary. It's totally different. Does the same thing, but totally different than any of the Pi-Star based. And then you've got the Blue DV. And the Blue DV is what I've got set up here on the end with my iPad. It is a Bluetooth board on the bottom. It's the radio board on top. And then it uses the iPad or your iPhone or your Android device as the processing power. And it's kind of a neat little setup. It's very easy. It's limited in the number of rooms that you can get into, and it's only YSF and only DMR. And then the last thing that I discovered quite by accident, you see that I've got battery packs up here operating. Because the middle Zoom spot and the iOS Zoom spot are plugged into the same battery, that battery is staying on. If I had only the iOS, it's not constantly processing, so it's not constantly pulling power, and the battery pack shuts off. You have to have a constant source of power for the iOS one. And that's really neither here nor there. This was just a little explanation to folks about how reflectors are. Reflectors are not a true wires X room. If you get into wires X and you think, oh, hey, I want to do this on my my hotspot with a YSF reflector. Not all Wires X rooms have reflectors. A lot of the popular ones do, but not all of them do. I have a Wires X room. It has no reflector. Thank you very much. Do appreciate it. I think it's time to rotate. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that presentation. Well, if you have any questions or comments about them, always leave it down in the comments below. I do filter through those and answer them to the best I can. But for more articles and information, please check out my blog at www.jpol-antenna.com. Your support of this channel drives the production of future videos. So if you enjoyed this video, you can always do a few things for me. You know, the first thing is, give me that big thumbs up. I really appreciate that. And since you've watched this far, you might as well hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Pressing subscribe and the little bell icon will notify you when future videos are released. Well, that's it for this time. I'm Michael, KD9IBT. Have a great day, and 73.